our second speaker, who's Dr. Keith Still. Keith is the Professor of Crowd Science at Manchester Metropolitan University, and he's a respected expert in his field. He's provided courses for the UK Cabinet Office Emergency Planning College and is the writer of Introduction to Crowd Science. We're very pleased to have him here, so could we have a round of applause for Dr. Keith Still?
Hello, and thanks for inviting me to QUBE. I've been told to keep each section to 7 minutes, so I'll try and rush through it. Just a little bit of background, heaps and heaps of experience, 30 odd years, well 28 years to be precise, of consulting on the maths and psychology of crowd behaviour. The initials, Fellow of the Institute of Mathematics and its application, Fellow of the Institute of Civil Protection and Emergency Management, Specialist Fellow of the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management, member of the Expert Witness Institute, Fellow of the Institute of Place Management, and a Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Mostly my work has been trying to teach people how to understand crowd risks, because there are 4 things that the human mind finds very difficult to visualize and comprehend. They're very fast and they're very slow. Anything that happens between in a second or 100 years, we've got a good comprehension of. But something that happens in a millisecond or the speed of light, it's very fast or very slow. The very big and the very small is another thing that we find difficult to comprehend, between a millimeter and 100 miles. Good visualization for that, but the distance between here and the sun, a light year, a nanometer, very big or very small. The third thing the human mind finds difficult to comprehend is statistics, the probability. And the fourth thing is dynamics, how things change over time. And when you're dealing with crowd risks, you're dealing with both statistics and dynamics. So the challenge is how to teach that to an audience of people that are generally up to their ankles in mud, dealing with large crowds. So they don't come from an academic background. And that really was the challenge. And I'm going to explain a couple of the tools that we've developed that you will find there are applications for this particular technique across a whole range of industries. I've demonstrated this to business officials and they've gone, well, that's a great idea. Can I apply it for? So what I'm going to do is show you my background and then hopefully open the discussion about how might you adapt this modeling technique to your own environment. So I run courses on this, and I've got a book. My publisher says I've always got to plug the book on any presentation, called Introduction to Crowd Science. And we run a whole bunch of short courses. And the reason I do this is that that's a list of incidents, and it's not even the complete list. It's a small fraction of the number of accidents and incidents that have occurred with crowds since Hillsborough, with, as you know, 96 dead, 400 injured. It's only now that they're bringing criminal charges for the Hillsborough incident, but the world really exhibits a lot of lack of understanding of statistics, probability, and crowd dynamics, particularly associated with crowd safety and crowd risk. And to highlight that, if I show you in red the ones that you could have identified if you knew what to look for in the plan. So just by looking at the site map, you could have recognized that these environments had a high risk of failure. So it doesn't mean that it is going to fail, but the probability of failure is significant. And you see the vast proportion of accidents are design related. Okay, so these are elements that you'd have identified by design. There are other incidents which are information related, where the information in the environment has changed, such as it suddenly started raining, a very predictable reaction from the crowd, and a failure in the organization to take into account of what the crowd would do if it started to rain. We're also seeing incidents where the threat of a terrorist activity, so a firework going off, can cause the crowd to overreact and result in extreme risk. And in order to try and put this multi-dimensional aspect of the problem into a manageable format, I created this template, which is, it's now being accepted by the police in the UK and across Europe as the standard model for crowds. It's called the demise model, and it's not by mistake that it sounds like demise. And we need to populate the table with information that's relevant to that site. So how does the design work during ingress? And that goes in the top left box. What information is required by the crowd for ingress? How do we manage the process of ingress? So in the top three boxes, we talk about the phase of crowd behavior getting into a venue. Below that, there's an emergency. What happens if there's an emergency during ingress? So the crowds are queuing, they're trying to get in, and maybe I've got a power outage, electrical failure, a suspect package, and I need to evacuate the site, but people are queuing to get in. And this forces people into thinking that an emergency is normally, in the event of an emergency, we stop the performance and everybody leaves in an orderly manner. But most of the accidents and incidents from the history have been when the crowds are coming in or getting out of a venue. So unless your plan has an emergency during ingress, a mid-event emergency, and an emergency during egress, it's not fit for its intended purpose. So by forcing people to populate the model, we force them to think about design, information, and management, the phases of crowd behavior, ingress, circulation, and egress, and how we can influence them. So our tools to make the crowd do the right things are our design, our information, and our management systems. From that, we get the team who populates the model, and it's a shorthand format there, to color code it: red, amber, and green. Green, the stuff that we think we do well; amber, stuff that we need to monitor on the day; and red, stuff that we need to improve. It's just not satisfactory. Now, these are vague definitions, but it forces the team working on an event into a structured, methodical thinking process. And what people have found with the model as we've deployed it over the years is that by thinking about phases and influences, they see the event through a different set of filters. They see it very much in the perspective of a dynamical system, how things are changing over time. And of course, by color coding it, we then got the ability for them to look about what do we need to improve. So it's designed to collect and collate information, to present it in a single format for normal and emergency conditions, to communicate that information to a multi-agency team who may all be talking different languages, but we'll focus on the red bits. You know, what do we need to do to make this better? And can use it as a quality assurance methodology. So, you know, we've got less red than we did last event. The other interesting thing is that when you compare the same crowd in two different venues, two different designs, two different management styles, two different information systems, or if you compare the same venue but with two different crowds, the difference between, say, a heavy metal band turning up and maybe a Disney on Ice event, then of course your management information design systems all have to be really tailored to the crowd's needs and requirements. Now, one of the things that came out of this, obviously, is that from the Manchester Evening News arena was the emergency during egress, the terrorist attacking the crowd on the way out of a venue. Now, as a methodology, the blank template and the kind of question that I'd like to pose to you is that that's just a template that's applicable to events, but you could have any set of information there that would allow you to look at how do we force people into thinking about the relationship between, say, phases and influences, or it might be location and time, or it might be a change management system and an implemented process. So as a table, maybe it's one of your little breakout sessions is how could you adapt this method of forcing people into a matrix form of blank template to achieve a particular goal within an industry? Because on my last presentation, I'm going to show you how we've used it for strategy and tactics for managing crowds, particularly under emergency situations. So if you want to have one of your little breakout sessions, maybe think about the template form for collating disparate information and collating thoughts. It's been a very powerful and useful technique. And of course, it comes from games theory. I mean, this is nothing more than a games theory or matrix application. So leave that with you, and then, okay, well, maybe if I kick off, we had a situation when I taught this out in Saudi Arabia. They said, oh, well, that might be very well for a football crowd, but it can't possibly apply to my event. My event is so unique, the Holy Mosque. And I said, well, okay, let's compare Wembley FA Cup final with the Holy Mosque. Does the design influence ingress? Wembley, we have Olympic Way, and the Holy Mosque, they have King Abdulaziz Road, King Abdulaziz Gate. Information, we have Sky Television telling us when it should start. The Holy Mosque, call to prayers, management system. And as they populated the table, they realized that what goes in the table defines the unique characteristics of their event. And then they said, oh, but you have to segregate reds and blues. And I said, well, you segregate males and females. And they went, oh, yeah, that's similar. And they said, but as a place of religious worship, well, Wembley at FA Cup final. And again, it forces people into a structured thinking that allows them to view a set of information, something that they might be familiar with, that they're running day by day, but they've never thought about it. So the development of this model was to force people into a thinking process. And of course, it's very applicable to a whole range of potential business applications.
Eddie, did I hear your voice?
Hi, hello, hi everyone. Sorry. I was in a noisy place, always bad, but I'm here.
Hey Eddie, how you doing?
Hey, hi Keith, welcome. Hi Jason, sorry about that.
Is this what came out of the pizza project?
This is the pizza project.
Excellent, I'm really pleased.
So, just some background, Keith and I go back a long way. So when we started Pentacle, Keith was really instrumental in the very first VR thing we built for Nuclear Electric. In fact, Keith built it, and I used to turn up at his apartment at 10 o'clock at night, and then he would code, and I would guide till about 2 a.m. So anyway, don't let us go into reminiscing.
Right, a quick question. Does anybody know what that is?
Yes.
A calculator.
Yeah, we used to send men to the moon by rubbing 2 bits of plastic together. Doesn't it sound extremely crude? One of the key elements that we tend to look at in crowd dynamics is that we've lost the ability to feel the dimensions of numbers. And of course, it's vital when you start to think about the number of people that might be at a particular event, is to get your order of magnitude right. We did work with the royal wedding planning, and they were 10 times out. They thought they had 10 times as many people as were actually there. They thought 500,000 on the Mall, it was 50,000. They thought 1 million people turned up to the site. It can't hold that. So people, when they think about numbers, as you'll find out when we talk about Donald Trump, get it very wrong. And when we're planning for safety, you really need to understand those numbers. Oh, hey, wait a minute. We give rise to the alternative facts. Now, this is the slide rule approach, is that whenever I'm asked for planning a major event, I only ever need to ask 4 questions. What are the routes? What area are you using? How do people arrive over time? And what type of crowd are you expecting? And I tend to use this slide rule approach for it. For example, I use tracing paper a lot because the ability for somebody to put their hand on a piece of paper, the tactile sensation they've got, when they draw a line, it moves through time and space. So they feel that. They see it, and you draw 2 different lines. You've got a visual tactile comparison. If you color code it red, amber, green, you're firing a whole lot of your senses that you just don't get when you're playing with a computer. If you are not distracted by Twitter feeds and Facebook or email messages or photographs of somebody's cat, then it's very easy to get distracted on that. But when you're dealing with crowd safety, you've got to have hands-on. So we get senior police officers actually drawing out the crowd flow plans, and this is some of the work that I did for the Sydney Olympics. So much so that we can demonstrate to them that if I'm doing a statistical analysis, a sample in key areas, I've got quite a reasonably accurate prediction of how a space might fill. And this was for London New Year event, is that I was able to provide a system for them that did a 1-minute clicker count on key locations, and I could tell them when that space would be full of maybe 200,000 people. So deploying statistical analysis and understanding how things evolve across time, really I've been doing this for, well, 30 odd years. The Sydney Olympics, for instance, we mapped the site, we had a look at how the crowds move around the site, and I looked at the entire game schedule and produced this model with a guy called John Webster, who included that, and you see it there on the center of the control room screen, a model of what they're expecting. They can see what's happening. They've got the train schedule, so any delays show up. They've got the weather forecast, the weather radar, which is on the top left-hand side of the screen. They can view any particular crowd movement on the site, and they know what they're expecting, so that it gives them a ready reckoner, the ability to get a good feel for what the crowd's supposed to be doing. And of course, this now turns it from a very reactive management system into a proactive management system. We know if this area gets a bit congested, we control it here, here, and here. So for the Sydney Olympics, we actually designed a series of lock gates, if you like, that allowed us to regulate and control crowd flow at key locations to prevent downstream congestion. Now, I won't go into the technical details of it, but because of that work, I was asked by the New York Times to do a little bit of live analysis of Donald Trump's inauguration. And these images produced by the New York Times actually came from Marcel and myself, who at 11 o'clock said, this is what it's going to look like in the next hour. So we were forward projecting the crowd movement. And of course, it ever so slightly upset the President of the United States. But the bigger chunk of the work that we did was the following day for the Women's March, where the New York Times asked us, well, that was great, can you do it again for the Women's March, which we didn't have any preparation time for that. We only had 2 days to set up for Trump's count. And we created this thermometer, which you'll see on the right-hand side, so that we were able, in real time, to tell the New York Times if the Women's March was a larger or smaller crowd than Trump's inauguration. And without boring you with the whole story, which is a 1 hour talk that I'm giving tonight, and I gave yesterday for the police commanders, it is possible to make a very good estimation of crowd build-up. And we came up with 460,000 people in real time for an environment just using key camera locations and the New York Times reporters. About a week later, a Canadian company had high resolution photography, and they were able to do a head count. So they actually estimated 440,000, but it took them 7 days to come up with the same results. Of course, what we did was we did it in real time. So there's their analysis. David, I think you've loaded the wrong hack on that one. That wasn't the transition slides that we had. But they actually did a physical head count on it. So again, it's using approximation, statistical analysis, understanding the dynamics of how things evolve over time that give us a phenomenal insight to crowds. And I teach people at a master's level on how to do this. In fact, several of my students at the moment are doing projects for crowd counting in large city environments. We've got one team that have just done an analysis for a major event up in Norway. So literally, by having the routes, the areas, the movement, and the profile of the crowd, I can get a very good prediction of crowd counting. So there's your crowd estimate. They actually had to physically do a head count. So our estimate in real time, 460,000. Their head count, which was 45 minutes after our count, they froze the photography at that point, they came up with 440,000 plus or minus 50,000. We said it's 460,000 plus or minus about 15. So in real time, using statistics and understanding the dynamics of the site, we get very reasonable, well, an accurate enough count to manage a situation before it becomes a problem. And of course, that upset President Trump because he said he had the largest crowd in the history of crowds ever. And he was lying.
That's a surprise.
I can prove it, and you know, we can prove it, and we've got lots and lots of a 1 hour very funny talk that we do about it. Marcel is he's a Serbian German tank commander and the German SAS, and he was still in the army when he had 3 months unpaid leave to start work at the university with us as the Enterprise Delivery Fellow. And he has a list of things that he's not supposed to do while he's in the army. If he changes job, he has to report to his commander. If if he moves house, he has to report to commander. If he gets married or has a new girlfriend, he has to report to his commander. But there was nothing on his list about upsetting the president or commander-in-chief of America. So he actually, we did a games analysis on this. He said, well, you either tell him what you're doing, nothing happens, or something happens. And if you don't tell him and something happens, you're in deep trouble. So he told his commander, and about half an hour later, he opened up the speakerphone, and the voice came back and said, how close are you to Professor Still? After Trump had said, I will not allow you or anyone like you to say that this wasn't the largest crowd in history. And the commander said, how close are you to Professor Still? And Marcel went, well, he's a friend. He's my professor. I'm at his house just now. I've just moved to Britain, and he's showing me the country. And, I'm staying here with his family. And, he's a nice guy. And they went, no. Physically, how close are you to Professor Still? And he went, meter and a half. And the voice went, get 50 meters away, maintain that distance for the next month, do not travel in the same transport system at the same time. And the two of us looked at each other, and it was one of those, oh my God, this is serious moments. And then the voice went, ho, 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 and you think we Germans have no sense of humor. We lived that for a while. And of course, Kellyanne Conway came out with the alternative facts comment, which if you look on Wikipedia, it's phenomenal to see how I've been interviewed about being in the gaslight when Trump and the trolls, the death threats that we got from his trolls, saying that, how dare we say the president didn't have the largest crowd in the history of the universe. We were getting death threats, and we started to even doubt ourselves. Were we sure we saw live video feeds? And had it not been for two people checking each other's work, it's very easy to get caught in the propaganda. Now, Marcel from Germany, of course, very aware of the Hitler phenomenon and the lying press phenomenon. So it's phenomenal to see it from the flip side of the psychology of how that influences you. But when you've got your science, you rely on your science, and really that's what we develop and model on. How are we doing for time, guys?
Yep, well, we're pretty tight, but I'll do a quick spin starting from the bottom. Tam, any comments or, anything, any questions or comments?
No question. I'm just absorbing all that and thinking about how we could use some of that in other kind of areas. So not in terms of crowd control, but the matrix and things. So yeah, my brain's just whirring just now.
Well, I'm just about to show you other applications on my final presentation here. So I think you'll find that useful.
Good.
Okay, so let's go there, and then we'll leave the final round of for questions.
Okay.
So if we can all come back here.
So from the dim ice model, which is really a games theory application to force people into a structured level of thinking, here's an example that saved $60,000 off a budget. The police had insisted that they need to be in all places at all times for the event. By analyzing the location on the left-hand side and the time across the top, we were able to identify that the areas of previous incidents of public order were in the pathways in the red sections. And therefore, we only needed police force or public order at that time in those locations. And by doing this form of analysis, by looking at how things progress and change over time, and presenting it in that tabular or matrix format, a significant cost saving was implemented. And you can see here where you might think about any resource down one side and any time or department allocation across the top, of how to think about resource redeployment. And again, it's a simple matrix technique, but in the environment that we're teaching in, they've never seen these sort of tools before. Here's another one where we looked at emergency communication. And this was how do interprofessional, oh, hang on, we've gone too far. How does interprofessional communication occur in an emergency on a site? So EOC is the event operating control. How do the police communicate with EOC? How do the police communicate with the first aid? And how do first aid communicate with the police? Because, of course, communication is not bidirectional. You might find that one process works from one organization to another, but that organization doesn't communicate directly back with the first. For instance, the crowd communicating with the police would have to phone the police central control. They can't talk to the police in the command room on the event site. they have to go to a police inquiry. So a 999 call, for instance, would be handled by a central operator. They've got no direct contact with the police on the site. So by identifying an emergency situation and how the communication protocol works, so the words describe how they communicate, and the color determines how effective that communication is. You see, we've got an awful lot of processing power. And again, by forcing people to put something in the box, it forces them to think, well, how does this work? In an emergency, you don't have time to analyze it, but of course, it's a desktop exercise. This is an ideal technique. And then finally, when we look at in emergency environments, across the top is the type of emergency, down the side is the location of the emergency, in words, the impact on the crowd, and in color, the severity that that problem would have. And again, for resource hardening security and protection, this is a very effective technique for analysing. One of the things we looked at, this is from Melbourne Cricket Ground, when they realised, you see that column at 22:30, it is red, it indicates a high density of crowd movement and a lot of people moving through a particular space. Now the staff are all laid off at 10 o'clock, but if somebody decides to attack the crowd on the way out, where are the resources? So by looking at that, and this was 2 years ago in Melbourne, we realized that we've got a vulnerable crowd leaving our venues. So somebody that's intent on doing the crowd harm, that's the most likely time that they can do something and have a maximum impact. On ingress, everybody's attention is focused on the process. But on egress, well, they've gone now. It's not my concern. But what the Melbourne Cricket Ground realized is that that's their crowd, and that they need to extend their barrier and extend the monitoring and extend the times that they're working in order to at least offer a modicum of security or at least observation to prevent that crowd coming to harm. So in summary, what I have is a whole bunch of tools. And these tools really focus on causality in accidents and incidents. We teach people how to use the right tool for the right kind of analysis. And I teach that in a 1 day and then a 3 day, and then in the master's program we go into the depth of analysis. But that's my work, is trying to get people to think in a structured manner for an environment that they may have been trained for years to stand in a patch or have learned from experience, but haven't learned from the experience of others. So by collating it into matrix formats, it forces people to have to fill in blank boxes and think about how one element relates to another. And really, that's what I wanted to get across. It's a technique that's applicable to a whole range of business applications. I specifically focus on crowd safety and crowd risk analysis. Thank you for listening.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thank you.